Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we're the Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. Do you know what I saw today, Ben?
Was it something paranormal?
Kind of, in a way. I saw the first advert that I've seen for Halloween.
Now, what, advertising a product for Halloween, I presume?
Yes, it was, you know, like those big, I can't remember the name of it, you know, those big kind of craft shops, the big warehousey ones.
Yeah. Hobby craft.
Yes. Something like that. They were doing a whole thing. We've got everything you need for Halloween.
Well, that is a bold statement.
Yeah, it is a bold statement. I thought we should go there.
Yeah, you're giving away what we're doing for Halloween. It's a whole crafting thing.
And talking of Halloween, you know, the other week we were talking about how people called Peter had got carried away with Halloween. So Peter at the Cross Keys had got carried away building us this amazing TV studio, effectively. And then I was just supposed to loop some music together and ended up making an ambient album.
Yes, that is definitely getting carried away.
Well, I've got carried away again because I thought you can't have an ambient album, again, in the spirit of the KLF's White Room, can't have an ambient album without a video, right?
You made a video.
Kind of made a movie. I mean, movie is really exaggerating it. It's a visual slideshow, but I just got completely stuck into that, you know. So it's amazing, this podcast. I ended up doing things that I don't need to do. I could have been researching something. I could have been doing my job. I could have been spending time with the family. But no, I've decided to make a video for our ambient album.
That's great. And I presume you'll be releasing this to our Patreons?
Definitely. Not for a while, because I haven't quite finished it yet.
And we've got to do the press junket.
Yeah, we've got to do the whole thing. We've got to premiere it at Cannes. We've got to do the whole thing.
I wondered what those tickets were for. Right.
Yes, no, we will. It will definitely go to our Patreons first, which are at patreon.com/TQM
pod.
Come and join us there. So we'll go there first, and we'll release it eventually on YouTube as well.
That's a good idea.
Brilliant. Okay, good. Now, you sent me a WhatsApp the other day saying that we're massive in Mongolia.
Yes, we are apparently massive in Mongolia. I've got a little, a little tool that's putting it.
You shouldn't be so hard on yourself.
I was trying to think of the right word for it. There's a little software gadget that I use for my real job, and yes, it told me that we were, I think, number 8 in the Mongolian chart for documentary, very briefly. So if you are in Mongolia, I don't know how many of you it takes to put us in the chart, but both of you, thank you.
Yeah, I'm really pleased about that. That's really cool. And we've got a new Patreon as well, I believe.
Yes, we have. Steph, thank you very much. Very much appreciated. She said she enjoyed the Stonewatch. And, you know, the next thing after Halloween and Christmas is Stonewatch in our calendar.
Oh, God, is it coming up again?
It'll be so much 25 before you know it.
Wow. And we're also, we're going to prison soon, aren't we?
We are going to prison soon, yes. Well, we will be looking at the spirits that reside at Shepton Mallet Prison. I'll tell you what, it's a good job they stay there and not in the local Travelodge, because blimey, that's expensive. I didn't realise how expensive Travelodges were.
That's a paranormal experience in itself. So, so we've got a lot of good stuff coming up. So keep with us. Keep with us.
Keep with us. I feel like we'll be one of those, you know, when you look at the reviews of other paranormal podcasts, they're like, too much chatting, just get on with it.
Yeah.
So I can't think of a good segue. Well, actually, I can. I'll think of one. Are you aware of anybody that talks to plants? Prince Charles aside, I think we know famously. But do you know people that may be gardeners who go and, I don't know, talk to the tomatoes or chat to the radishes?
I don't know any of them personally, but then I'm not a big gardener myself, so it's probably not something that would come up. I do remember hearing a theory, isn't it, something about the oxygen that you're putting out that they like, rather than the dulcet tones, but that's all I remember. And Prince Charles, obviously.
Right, so, yeah, I mean...
King Charles, we need to call him now. I wonder if he still talks to plants now he's a king.
King Charles the Spaniel. Yeah. There was a thing when I was growing up when... Do you remember you weren't allowed to leave plants in hospitals overnight? Yeah. And they said it was because it took the oxygen out of the air.
Yeah.
I think that was a deliberate ploy because obviously it means people don't knock them over in the night and annoy the nurses. But yeah, that oxygen thing, that probably has been put around. But I'm going to talk about something completely different, and we might end up back at Pan for a moment. But when we were talking a while back about the spirits, the nature spirits, and the fun that we had with those, and do you remember me talking about the Potato King, all of that brilliant stuff? Because obviously we do science as well as the paranormal and try and make them meet in the middle. This is the perfect topic, and I just want to give credit to, this comes from the HAL Open Science Project, not that HAL, a different HAL, and very specifically the work of Teresa Castro in this, because absolutely fascinating. I think you will find this fascinating because it all starts in really 1972. This is where we land with a video called Teaching a Plant the Alphabet by a gentleman, it's unfortunately a late gentleman, called John Baldessari. And he is holding up a succession of children's alphabet cards and repeating each letter to a potted banana plant until he's completed the alphabet. It was made for a presentation at one of his classes at Cal Arts called Teaching a Plant the Alphabet, and is often quoted as a conceptual art parody. But he himself said teaching a plant the alphabet was done during the hippie times. There were books about how to communicate with your plants. And I thought, hey, okay, let me start with the alphabet and then we can talk. This is sort of getting us into that spirit of how did people begin thinking that plants might be more than plants.
It's making me think of, you mentioned it the other week, actually, Day of the Triffids as well,
yes,
which is one of my all-time favourite stories.
We're going to kind of end up... Well, we're going to go past that, actually. We'll go through that period. Because in the early 1970s, the beliefs that plants were sentient and intelligent entities, that's kind of when the Triffids and stuff was talking. But people began to think that they might be capable of reacting to human thoughts and emotions, as well as to pain, music, even animals' emotions. And this thought became widespread. It nurtured this popular culture, as she puts in this article, or this scientific paper, a flirtation with vegetable beings. Magazine articles on the extraordinary powers of plants, she says, were literally everywhere, quoting the Ladies' Home Journal and a magazine called Electrotechnology. I wish that was still being published.
What a great magazine title.
I know. And it became increasingly natural to play music to your houseplants. A certain Mrs. Hashimoto, who took the satirical venture seriously, the teaching your plant the alphabet, and she set herself to teach the Japanese alphabet to a cactus.
Oh God, I tried learning the Japanese alphabet for 3 years. Good luck with that. I also thought, what is a tree's favourite music? It's got to be Bach, hasn't it?
Oh, dear God. This is puntastic, this show. It really is. In The New Scientist in 1973, there was an article which observed that every art school diploma has its share of vegetable sculptures, but also several artists are following the footsteps of scientists by conducting their own experiments with plants and treating these activities as works of art. She then sort of goes back in time to describe that we've got this general plant craze emerging in the late 60s, which sort of turns into this in the 70s. But it catches visual and popular culture alike. And unlike those fads in the 60s, which fundamentally sort of made the plants do you know what I mean? Like they were something to have around you because it made you more spiritual. And there's this whole thing about walking barefoot on the grass to be with nature, hugging a tree.
Yeah, hugging a tree is what I thought about. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of that was also put about by consuming plants and fungi in some way, shape or form as well.
Yeah. Well, this 1970s plant mania becomes this blow to the belief that sentience and intelligence are a human prerogative. So that in the 60s was kind of, if you're having a trip, you might want to get close to a plant because it'll make you feel better. Yeah. And in a sense, that is where some of we'll sort of talk about the Findhorn garden, which I brought up before, but that's where some of that comes from, which is that it's the plants are playing very much second fiddle to human intelligence, whereas here what we're saying is, against this background of hippie times, which celebrated the Earth Day, that's the first time we did that in 1970.
Right.
We're getting this different form of relationships between nature and plants and people.
I guess Lord of the Rings was a bit ahead of its time as well, with the sentient trees as well. And that I like that concept in Lord of the Rings, that there's that bit where they have that conversation. It goes on for ages because trees don't need to talk that fast.
Yes, that's
Brilliant.
true. Yes. Yes, I hadn't even thought about that. But there's this plethora of articles, books, records, artworks, and films, all on the subject of plant communication. And this cannot be fully explained by this counterculture of nature, weed, magic mushrooms, and other mind-altering substances, even though apparently this is considered important to get us to this place where we're considering plants as something else. Right. Going into this, she cites Cold War paranoia, New Age spirituality, and this flourishing of ecological thinking. So this turns into this kind of entangled web of paradoxical tendencies in universities and people who are conducting real science, in inverted commas.
It also seeped into commercial culture as well, because I when you were saying it, I was thinking of, do you remember that Coca-Cola advert, I'd like to teach the world to sing?
Yes.
In perfect harmony. It's that kind of vibe, isn't it? Similar vibe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much so. Very much so. And there's a lot of time. I mean, you might have been taught this at school, but there's these experiments that are happening in high schools where, does a courgette seed germinate faster to the sound of Mozart or rock music? Right. Or does a plant go into flower earlier with an Indian flute or AC/DC? AC/DC, I'm picking those out there. And some people, this isn't the main thrust of it, but because we've moved on from that hippie culture into something that is mostly scientific but sometimes pseudoscientific, some people use this as an opportunity to say that rock music was bad because plants don't grow so well to that, but they grow more to Mozart. You probably know that as a thing because it's being covered on TV programs. People that play classical music, I found a YouTube clip saying, somebody saying that their onions prefer the sound of a violin to a jazz trombone. People start attributing their own prejudices to the plants.
Yeah. But
in the 1970s, this plant craze also relies massively on what she calls the cybernetic paradigm, which includes this is like the systems theory and electronics. So envisaged as self-regulating biological systems, plants were recognized not only as being able to communicate with us and with each other, but as communication systems in themselves. Their electrical and chemical responses to the environment and other stimuli, such as telepathic stimuli even, were now understood in terms of inputs and outputs that generated feedbacks. Their intelligence resides in the capacity to learn and self-correct in response to this feedback, mirroring the intelligence of other larger and more complex natural systems. That's the view that begins to propagate around the scientific community. They're their own regulated systems.
Is that a kind of scientific equivalent of Mother Earth kind of thing?
It is, but it's eminently technophilic. So even eco-mystical quests to reach the plant other, often depended on interfacing with electronic extensions. So people who are looking at psychedelic experiences sometimes explain this with the language of cybernetics. So they talk about how they process the world differently. This idea of in the 60s, there's this, have an LSD trip and you're just breaking on through the barriers and you're sort of bending your mind. Whereas people in the 70s start to discuss this idea of, well, maybe the plant here that I'm taking a trip with is making me see into another dimension. You see the subtle differences. It's like maybe we're experiencing something that the plant is experiencing, and that relates back to the biological system that they believe it has. It's like, we're making use of the system, and perhaps the plant can make use of our system as well.
There's something quite Native American Indian about that, and Yeah, South American indigenous tribes as well. That's very big in that connection. Everything's connected, is what you're talking about. in a way.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. So in this paper, she cites some ways of looking back in time that brought us to the 1970s, because it is quite important, this way of thinking about plants, and how where we're going to is like some actual real credible scientific experiments which kind of show that actually some of this thinking is not only accurate but is scarily accurate. Okay. And she talks about this book which I had never heard of. 1959, Reverend Franklin Lower published this book called The Power of Prayer in Plants. It's a good job we've got one of these pop guards on there.
Yeah, Ben's just showered me.
Michael Hasseltine that was the spitting image puppet, wasn't it? Yeah.
Go on, do it one more time. What's that book called?
The Power of Prayer in Plants.
Beautiful.
And it was based on 700 air quote experiments implicating 150 people and 27,000 seeds. The book illustrates how McCarthyism, right, and its deep-rooted fright of communist atheism stirred American piety. In the 1950s, as much as 94% of Americans believed in the power of prayer, and scientists quickly dismiss Lower's book, but the idea that the mind could somehow have its way over vegetable matter continued to make progress. So basically, in this book, he lays out this theory that if you pray over seeds, they will be more successful. Right. And so what he's trying to do there is, as she says, when you read the book, it's very much like trying to defend the sort of Christian ethics through this idea of that you are more godly and therefore more closer to the plants if you pray over them, and we're all God's beings, and the plants somehow are picking up on the consciousness of the human that is doing that for them. That's basically what his thesis is there.
I kind of buy it to a degree, but then you've got stinging nettles, which I don't know how that fits into that.
To be honest, every time I walk through stinging nettles, I do go, oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, true.
So when the scientists sort of dismissed the book and the idea that the mind could somehow have its way over vegetable matter made progress. So this idea of psychic research, whose potential for military and domestic intelligence was evident not just for science fiction writers, but it gained this momentum from the 50s onwards on both sides of the Iron Curtain. And we know that very well, as we talked about remote viewing and all of that. We know that. And a quick search, we always go back to the CIA archives. The CIA archives...
You've been delving.
Well, she did. And she talks about a number of declassified reports on the study of psychic phenomena in relation to plants, which the military, in their war against the enemy, dreamt of turning into organic sensors, bioinvaders, and green spies. Wow. When I saw that, I couldn't help think about the cat. You know,
yes. No, they did have some crazy ideas in
Yeah.
those days. I was wondering, back to your prayer thing, wanted to bring some psychology thoughts into it, because I don't know whether that experiment's in the book. I'm sure the conclusion was praying for plants makes them better than not praying for them. But if there was some truth in that, I wonder if there's almost a subconscious bit of you that slightly looks after the plants better than the ones that you're praying for. Do you know what I mean? Subconsciously gives them a little bit more water, or cares about them more.
I think that is probably true. And there used to be a thing where, and my father remembered this, you could buy pyramids. Right. And they were kind of like wireframe pyramids. Sometimes they're made of plastic. And we had one of these at our primary school. And it wasn't just an experiment. It was considered fact that if you put this pyramid over the plants when you were growing it, it would grow faster. And I remember in our classroom, we had quite a hippie teacher when I was probably about 8. And in our classroom, we experimented in different places to grow cress. So sometimes, a pot outside, a pot by the radiator, a pot in a dark cupboard, and a pot under the pyramid. She was saying, of course it'll be the pot under the pyramid that grows the highest. And so as kids, you go, well, we best take better care of that one. And I can't remember what the conclusion was, but apparently you could order them out of the back of Sunday Times magazines or whatever, not necessarily the Sunday Times, but Sunday magazines. You could buy these pyramids, and Dad said, yeah, it was pretty common practice in offices. You'd see people with these pyramids. It was a bit of a craze in the 70s.
Was there any science behind, pseudoscience behind it?
No, not
there's
at all,
no explanation of why it worked.
No. It goes down to this belief that that then is sort of the mystical pharaohs and the power of the pyramids, and this it's sort of a bastardization of various different thoughts and beliefs. But if you say, plants grow better under this, because the people are so used to having this kind of discussion about plants happening more regularly, then I accepted it. Yeah. And don't forget, this is a time when even my dad as a physics teacher would use a water diviner in the garden. Right. It just seemed natural. But let me just, before we lose the CIA.
We don't want to lose the CIA.
No, and we've spoken about this guy before, Cleve Baxter.
Yeah.
He decided on a whim to hook a polygraph machine to the leaf of a drachnia. And he wanted to see if the plant reacted to being watered. And apparently, after his astonishment, it did. It registered a huge surge of electrical activity in the plant, similar to that of an emotional stimulus in a human subject. Right. He was intrigued and decided to proceed with the experiment by dunking a leaf of the plant in hot coffee. There was no reaction. What if he burnt it? And then it happened. As he imagined the drachnia being set on fire, the needles on the polygraph began to move, and it was as if the plant could read his mind. And that set him off on a number of different studies. And this is in the CIA archive, because then you can see, this is what she's talking about in terms of systems. If a plant can be understood to read your mind, and you can understand what it is that it's saying to you, then you could read the mind of your enemy via a drachnia plant. This is what they're thinking.
And I'm not quite sure how those polygraph tests work. I thought they were to do with sweat, but let's say it is electrical activity. There is some logical sense that if you feed a plant some water, it is doing something. It's processing that water, so it must create more energy in some way. Similarly, if it feels under threat, it will, you know what I mean? I'm not. So I'm assuming they ruled that out, that it's just a process of a plant.
Well, no. So the first thing could be a process of the plant. But the fact that it reacts when he imagines burning the leaf.
Oh, okay. So he didn't actually.
No.
Sorry, I didn't get that bit.
No. Before he even burns it, he puts it in the coffee. No reaction.
Okay.
Then he thinks to himself, "I'm going to burn it with a lighter," and then the plant freaks out. That's the point.
Which reminds me of the other thing we covered: those tests with people looking at photographs.
Yes.
Some were, pleasant, lovely photographs. Some were horrific.
Yes.
But they measured their responses just before they saw the photographs, and they were consistent with what was coming up, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that's kind of...
Similar theory, right?
That's kind of the precognition thing. But yes, you could see, if you were interested in this, that how you might align that with a plant reading your mind and somehow be able to read Khrushchev's brain during that Cold War. But she points out, in the years to come, he and his collaborators multiplied the experiments, plugging dozens of plants and vegetables into lie detectors.
Wow.
And concluding that lettuces, onions, oranges and bananas are also a number of ordinary houseplants, could perceive and respond telepathically to human thoughts and emotions.
Wow.
As incredible as it sounds, and much to science's dismay, Baxter's thesis on plants' extrasensory perception and their astounding emotional capabilities, shared by the author in the winter 1968 issue of the International Journal of Parapsychology, quickly spread worldwide. How was this possible? Of course, the hippie times helped for people to take up the idea, but two concerned scientists were to bitterly acknowledge in the pages of American Scientist in 1979, in the troubled years of the late 60s, a wave of anti-intellectualism swept the United States, accompanied by an anti-scientism that still persisted and persists in some measures. And so critics were quick to equate the science with anti-humanism and call for the reliance on alternative ways of arriving at an understanding of the universe around us. So basically, this amazing work that was put out was not only poo-pooed, but he was made to feel that, so she uses that word anti-humanism. He was made to feel like he was doing something against nature, and this is because, so this is the anti-hippie effect.
Right.
If you are hanging out with people who are dropping acid and going, hey, let's talk to plants, again we go back to, they're going to lose their funding, they're going to do this. And in some ways, unfortunately, this was also perceived as ungodly as well. Right. So it didn't really garner the attention it could, because when you read that and you read it that it's in a CIA archive, it's a little bit like when we read about Uri Geller. Yeah. And you think, how is it possible to see these incredible results? We won't go into, whether Uri Geller cheated or whatnot. Let's just assume that the results appear to be what they appear to be, and the results of this appear to be what they appear to be. Then we've come to a completely different paradigm of understanding humanity and the world around us, and very particularly the things that we share the earth with. And that should have changed everyone's perception forever.
Yeah. Well, it's making me think of, and we've talked about this a number of times, I think that was the really clever thing with the American military, the people who were behind the remote viewing project, because what they did, I think, quite successfully, whatever your views on it, was de-paranormal it, demystify it, psychic it, and made it, having a manual, making it almost feel like a militaristic project rather than something a bit woo-woo, And I imagine part of that was a reaction to the kind of thing you're talking about with these experiments with plants, because the way you're describing it, they were poo-pooed because, well, it's just not right, rather than anything. You know what I mean? It was a ideological dismissal of it more than a scientific one in the way you're describing it.
You're absolutely right. And it's also about the presentation of it. And all of his theories would have remained in that CIA archive and probably remained confidential at that. Yeah. Had it not been for a journalist and former spy, Peter Tompkins, who wrote I think it's now a classic, I mentioned this again to my father and he remembers it, Secrets of the Great Pyramids, 1971, and Mysteries of Mexican Pyramids, which is possibly where we get this idea of putting plants on the pyramids from. Right. But with the help of a botanist, Christopher Bird, Tompkins wrote The Secret Life of Plants, and she puts it mainstreaming Baxter's findings and rediscovering, along the way, a number of forgotten plant intelligence champions, including there's this guy, there's a Bengali biologist, and there's a guy, a Jewish guy. There's a number of different people. It doesn't really matter about their names. But this book, with all of these very well-intentioned and full of understanding contributors, it's propelled with a lavish advertising campaign, and it has this pre-publication title, which is called Love Amongst the Cabbages, Sense and Sensibility in the Realm of Plants. Right. That makes it a lot more palatable to humans, makes it a lot more palatable to publishers, who then take it and translate it into many different languages. Yeah. But it's not the only book of the time to get into the untapped powers of plant sensibility and communication. The same year, a lady called Dorothy Ritalik published a book called The Sound of Music and Plants, and that also sold well. Like the previous book, she sells herself as a doctor's wife, housekeeper, bookkeeper, mother, and grandmother to 15. And she had conducted a number of experiments in the late 60s using biotronic control chambers available at Temple Jewell College in Denver, and her thesis, this is what I was alluding to, rock music was harmful to plants, and therefore humans too. And she was not the first to investigate the classical music on plants theory. She was, however, the first to expose them to a tape of Led Zeppelin, Vanilla Fudge and Jimi Hendrix. And according to her findings, plants seem to like rock and Ravi Shankar, and they even gave her positive evidence of enjoying jazz. However, when it came to rock, they leaned away from the source music, displaying smaller leaves and eventually dying. So you see how we've got these competing ideologies. Yeah, even Hendrix.
I'm upset about that.
Well, I would have thought that Hendrix would have encouraged the plant growth.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times in his life when he was 12% plant. During the 70s, there were a few plant music recordings, there's records released. Some of them put together chamber and classical music hits for you to play to your plants.
Really?
And others, such as Baroque Bouquet's Plant Music in 1977, or Roger Rogers' De la Musique et des Secrets pour enchanter les plantes, offered original compositions for green audiences. Amongst these, Mort Garson's Plantasia, which apparently had percolating moog rhythms, it's described as.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Acquired a legendary status. And one album in particular, Molly Roth's Plant Talk and Sound Advice. It's a double-sider.
Oh my God! I've got to want to hear all of these now.
Evokes Balderas' parody as spoken word artist Roth invites plants to invites plants such as ivies and ferns to understand the alphabet. So they kind of take that original experiment and set it to music.
I've got this vision of a gardener panicking because the Four Seasons comes on. It's not spring yet. It's not spring. Turn it off. Turn it off.
It's remarkable, though, isn't it? You could see how this is all catching fire.
I want to hear some of those. The Moog one sounds brilliant.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want. No, we probably can't drop them into here because they're probably still owned by someone. Yeah. I'm sure you can look them up, though.
Yeah, if we come across them, we'll put links in Patreon so you can go and check them out. I really want to hear them now. I want to stop recording and just go, but we carry on.
Now, you remember when we were talking about the ectoplasm?
Yes.
And it was the camera that really made the psychics have to move on to something else, those that were being fraudulent, because they need something to show. Well, in a similar way, the mediation of graphic technology seems to have been a decisive element in the scientific exploration of the richness and complexity of plant life, because it opens up this theoretical horizon around plants' agency and their awareness, sentience, thinking, or even intelligence. Think about it. If you can't measure it, all you can do is philosophize about it.
Yeah.
Now with these new instruments that were obviously built not for talking to plants, but we've discovered that you can do that with them, suddenly people are measuring stuff that they never measured before.
Right.
So this 70s plant craze illustrates how these polygraphic machines so you know how they do these scribblings, they sort of go up and down to so you get people started talking about vegetable energy auras and electronic renditions of plant signals. So we get the sort of things, we get a new language to describe how plants are behaving. And without these recording apparatuses, the secret life of plants would have remained concealed, imperceptible to the naked eye and the naked ear. These machines transform the electrical and chemical signals into non-verbal, iconic language, the language of these graphs, diagrams, mathematical formulas, and they endowed the whole aspect with an aura of scientificity. And these images extend vision into the previously unseen realms. So now you can point at a graph and say, I'm looking at this. And nobody can argue with you, because it's not like I'm hoping the plant will grow a bit bigger. No, we've got this actual graph and we're looking at it. This kind of winds its way back into the culture. So we've got articles, books, and record sleeves, all with images of plants wired to these apparatus. And you get this, she describes it as a mechanical self-portrait. It's like we've suddenly turned these plants into like hookup things. It's almost like a sort of a dystopian image of plants all wired up in a human way.
Yeah.
Of course, it is pointed out by the author. There was a book in 1880 called The Power of Movement in Plants by Charles and his son Francis Darwin, and they generated a load of images conceived with the ingenious devices involving smoked glass plates and beads of wax on glass needles, allowing for plants to record their own motion. So that period wasn't the first to do it, but they were trying to, again, measure aspects of the plant life using apparatus.
Is that the Charles Darwin?
It is, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, yes. Wow. And this is also pleasing. There's a gentleman called Chandra Bose who died in 1937, but published an exquisitely illustrated plant autographs book. And it's called Plant Autographs and Their Revelations, actually. And Bose was an important pioneer in the study of radio and electromagnetic waves, who later turned his attention towards the movement and electrical responses in plants. I imagine that is the Bose that we're thinking of when we talk about a Bose speaker.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah. And he designed a load of sensitive instruments, including the photosynthesis recorder and the magnetic cresograph, which it's nothing to do, well, it probably is something to do with cress, but they both register plant growth. The oscillating recorder, which documents the ascent of sap, and the automatic recorder, which records leaf movements as well as variations of temperature in plants. So people have been trying to do this for ages, but less because they were interested in them as a system, more that they wanted to get deeper into the biology of them, really.
And there's a lot of connection then between plant life and sound and music, and interesting, yeah. I guess they've not got eyes, so we wouldn't make it a visual thing, would we?
No. But then this brings us into the purview of the brilliantly named Norbert Wiener. Now, I'd never heard of Norbert Wiener before, but when you Google him, he is, in fact, very famous. And he believed that engineering theories of control and communication could explain behaviour in humans, animals, and machines. And he, in 1948, coined the term cybernetics, laying down the foundations for this field that was to become like the ground zero of the understanding of how people behave and how they work and how machines work during the Cold War. We're getting to this period where in that era, things are becoming technophilic, as she used that word before.
Yep.
And his insights on vegetable beings as communication systems, responding to stimulation through electrical signals, foreshadow some of the tenets of the cybernetic model that was to sort of grow up around that period. Not that the cybernetics was based upon plants, but it begins to, the plants play a role in it because it's understood that they do have a system there. And interestingly, and I didn't know this, cybernetics flourished in the USSR, permeating not only the imagery around plant science, and there was a lot of that. So, as you're probably aware, Russia was an eminent filmmaking country, and there's two, I suppose, documentaries you'd call them. They were pitched as films from the Moscow Studio of Science Films called The Voice of Plants and Are Plants Sentient? And the films are marked with this kind of overwhelming presence of recording apparatus, polygraphs, graphs, other instruments. And this meant, this sort of ideology and those films meant that plant communication was taken very seriously in the Soviet Union. So by the end of the 1960s, it had become a subject worthy of study. And the best equipped science labs offered it as a chance to, as a thing that you could study.
Well, again, if you can make that work, if you think of massive country like Russia, if you can just, I don't know, increase your crop yield by 10 or 15%, that has a major implication, doesn't it? So yeah. I guess you'd be open to trying that because you don't really care what's behind it as long as it works, right?
No, exactly right. But again, they had this same idea of if you can understand how a plant works, maybe you can understand how your enemy works. Right. All of this grows up around the Cold War. And apparently there is this iconic imagery as an electronic chip is carefully grafted onto a plant's stem, and this cybernetic paradigm becomes evident. Reports in the Soviet press mention transforming plants into live electrical relays, and this is a demonstration that it is not only possible, but it's done. And you can talk about how, yes, it's you could say that it's a propaganda tool, but this wasn't aimed at the West. This was internal science there, and that means that in Electronics World publication in the USSR, there's an entire article called Electronics and the Living Plant. This is based around merging technology and plant life together as a single system, which is completely, like, for me, that blew my mind knowing that was 1969.
Yeah, when you think about its influence in science fiction later, that kind of, that mixture of organic and robotic is such a theme, isn't it? That's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, this became such a thing that there was an American delegation invited out to go and watch these films and talk to some of the scientists there. And it's described that they get shown this sort of this filmic, cinematic experience of time-lapse photography of plants dancing and flowers opening and closing when darkness comes and goes, and as if they were creatures living all in their own time zone. But then what they demonstrate is you get this injury-induced change when recording by a sensitive polygraph attached to the plants. And the American delegation's reaction is surprising, since time-lapse cinematography had been used since 1898 to study plant motion. It seems like they had not looked at the same things that the Russian scientists had. And this notion of putting electronics into plants absolutely shocked this American delegation into, like, thinking that we've been taking this all too lightly and not seriously, because nobody in the States had been thinking of it to this degree. So when we'd been talking about, like, doing time lapses on plants, that's how long it takes a tree to grow or whatever. They're looking at it to try and understand the nuances of the system.
It sounds like the Americans are almost seeing it as, okay, that's how a plant grows, but it feels a bit like the Russians are looking for patterns, looking for order in the chaos, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. They're looking for order in the chaos, but they're looking for how do you control it and who controls what. And all of this, as you mentioned before, is not only confined to science films. This begins to spread out into popular consciousness. So there's an episode of Tales of the Unexpected called The Sound Machine, where it has an engine capable of perceiving the screams of flowers that are being cut. Right. And in the same year, an episode from a series called The Dark Room, a botanist develops an apparatus able to read the mind of a daisy, and his wife learns from the flowers that his assistant is having an affair.
God, those daisies are such gossips.
Yes, exactly. And apparently, we've all heard of the cult classic Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Well, apparently that was inspired by Baldessari's Teaching a Plant the Alphabet. That was the writer was inspired by that. But the real baby, the study of plant awareness and potential challenging of the exclusiveness of knowing and feeling as being human assets, was thrown out with the bathwater, because this popular culture, and we did speak about things like the Triffids, but also Little Shop of Horrors, yes. It diminishes its status. It's a little bit like having Frankenstein and trying to convince people that you could stick different body parts together, except in the sense of the plants, they were doing real science, they were getting real results, but the funding disappeared. And in this paper, she says you can draw a straight line between all of these popular culture references and the diminishing interest that certainly the US has in putting any money into this.
Saw the other day an interesting fact about Little Shop of Horrors, the movie. They spent a fortune shooting the final scenes. And in the final scene, the big plant, I can't remember its name. But effectively, in Little Shop of Horrors, the plants take over the world. Mm-hmm. They conquer us. And then when they played it to test audiences, they hated it so much. So they spent a fortune with these amazing scenes and graphics, and they had to throw all that out. And, the guy who runs the shop basically wins out in the end, and the plant dies. So,
wow, okay.
Interesting.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I would have preferred that ending.
Yeah.
But yeah, 30 years before anybody really picks up the mantle again. And this is the guy that did it. This is what I read first that got me to put this whole episode together. Many people have seen the plant, which is called a touch-me-not. Have you seen one of these? It's called a mimosa, and it folds its leaves when it's touched. You seen one of those?
Yeah.
Not many people know that if you put one of those into a sealed chamber with a dose of anaesthetic, it will eventually stop doing this, as though it's been knocked out and put to sleep. And the anaesthetic doesn't need to be special. Diethyl ether, even lidocaine, which is a dental drug, is effective when it's applied to the roots. And what's more, if you attach electrodes to the surface of the leaves at the same time, you'll see that the waves of electrical activity that usually spread through the plant are suppressed.
Right.
This isn't confined to that one particular plant. It seems like all plants are susceptible to anaesthesia. And it's just that the effects are more dramatic. You can see it in Venus flytraps as well, apparently. Yeah. But this guy, Paco Calvo at the University of Murcia in Spain, he's done this trick several times in front of audiences, and he says it never fails to surprise onlookers, prompting them to ask the very questions that he himself is trying to answer. If plants can be put to sleep, does this mean they exist in a state of awareness that is shut off by anaesthetics? Might we consider this state to be as kind of sentience, a subjective internal experience? And if so, do plants have some form of consciousness?
Wow, it's making me think, do they feel pain?
Well,
which kind of a lot of what you said seems to suggest they are. So if you're a tree surgeon, maybe we need tree anaesthetists.
Yeah. Well, he says, he's written several papers about it. He says intelligence is not quite as special as we like to think. He argues that it's time to accept that other organisms, even drastically different ones, may be capable of it. Calvo describes many experiments that reveal plants' remarkable range, including the way they talk to each other using chemical talk. He says a language that's encoded in about 1,700 volatile organic compounds. And he says other studies show that some plants retain a memory of where the sun will rise in order to turn their leaves towards the first rays. They store this knowledge, an internal model of which of what the sun is going to do for several days, even when kept in total darkness. The conclusion must be that they constantly collect information, process it, and retain it in order to make predictions, learn, and even plan ahead.
Yeah.
He also says, clearly plants don't have brains in any familiar sense of the word, but although they lack a sort of a central area for doing the thinking, he believes that they have something that he calls green matter. In the absence of nerves, plants use networked cells to regulate themselves. Their vascular system consists of tubes arranged in layers, like a cortex in a person, that run from root to the shoot. And it transmits electrical signals like a green cable that carries news throughout the plant. This, he suggests, is where we need to look for something he calls phytonervous system. He admits, however, that it's too early to say whether even in the most complex plants it amounts to the functional equivalent of a hierarchically organised but diffused brain, or something other. And that's the big question: is if it isn't that, what is it?
It's reminding me. I think this is right from my memory. Octopuses, isn't their whole body in some sense a brain rather than a kind of single location? It's a very similar concept, isn't it? We almost think of it in that kind of mammal-like thing of, oh no, it's the thing that's in your head. But yeah, that concept, if you were a plant, well, look how trees work. It would make sense if you did have some level of thinking, you would spread your brain across the whole thing, because you don't know which bit of it's going to get chopped off at any point, right?
Right, exactly. So he studies that for a living. I mean, that is his job. He is a scientist dedicated to studying plant consciousness. But because of that question mark around, well, if it isn't sort of a plant brain, what is it? It reminded me, as I said, about the Findhorn garden and this idea of there being nature spirit. If you haven't heard this episode, the Findhorn garden, it all comes about because this guy has an encounter with the great god Pan, and Pan tells him that all plants have an etheric plane that we are all part of, is made up of this fine energy substance from which is created the mould for every form we see manifest in the physical plane. You see, Pan is a little bit wordy. Each material form has an etheric counterpart. That such a thing exists at all will be questioned by many people. At the moment, it cannot be scientifically proven, though no doubt this will be possible in the future. We do know ourselves to be far more than just our physical bodies. So this idea, this plant loving guy who plants this garden so that he can nurture the nature spirits with his wife, this is basically what Pan tells him, that plants live in symbiosis with a nature spirit who you can't see and you can't touch, and you only in certain circumstances like they've got can you speak to them. But that is what is making the plant grow. So all the way through this, I was thinking, well, this is all fantastic, but what if the potato king is sat there going, it's me, stop cutting the leaves off my plant? Because that is what that is what they would say. I found an article where scientists have captured the sound of screaming plants when they're harvested. It's a popping or clicking noise, apparently, at ultrasonic frequencies outside the range of human hearing. And the researchers at Tel Aviv University in Israel have been doing a lot of research on this. But the most astounding thing about it is that they don't know how the plant makes the noise. They can't work it out. And is it electrical? Well, they seem to have ruled that out. At the time of writing, it says in this scientific paper published 2 years ago, it's not clear how the plants produce the noises. What if it's the potato king? What if it's Pan? I feel like every time we do a paranormal topic as the main theme, we row back and go, yeah, but you could explain it scientifically. But I'm doing the opposite in this. We've gone through this whole idea of how people got to think about plants as having a consciousness and how people came to study them and what they might have used it for. But what if all the time it's Pan and his people, Pan's people?
Pan's people. Brilliant. And you notice I did resist doing the Potato King joke.
What's that?
Well, he's obviously called King Edward.
Oh, yes, of course.
It almost feels like a religious ecosystem for plants. Each plant, I don't know whether every individual plant or sections of plants almost have some kind of plant god,
Yeah, well, that is definitely what the Findhorn lot thought. Yeah. I think with the other one, with the scientific research, what is so alluring about it is that nobody can quite work out exactly what's going on, but something is going on. And again, if the CIA were looking at it 50 years ago or 60 years ago, then something's definitely going on. And the fact that a scientist is currently being paid to do it. But I also, I'm intrigued by the way that society forms what we look into by the common culture that pervades it at the time and prevents us from getting further with it. I feel like at some point in, maybe in 20 years, we might start looking back and go, what really killed our understanding of what ghosts are is Most Haunted, or YouTube and all the ghost hunters on YouTube. Maybe that did it because
the fakery and all that stuff.
Exactly, because it stopped us being able to put money onto something because people would laugh at it. And so you have to look back down the chain. But I love this idea of some American scientists turning up in Russia and going, blimey, I wish we'd thought of that.
Well, but I do wonder if things gradually do seep in back into the culture, because I don't know why, but I was thinking about UFOs and aerial phenomenon, just the fact that we've talked about it a number of times, it becomes the stuff of the "and finally" bit on the news, doesn't it? The humorous thing, or of the late night talk shows. But it is being covered, and I've noticed a change in it. There'll be laughy, jokey, little green men jokes, but there's almost an angle to it of going, "Oh, there's something weird going on," which we never had. So I wonder if this is the equivalent of that. But it also makes you think it's really difficult, isn't it, where a concept or a theory feels outlandish or, to use the pun, unearthly to us, that it almost becomes impossible to research it, even to look into it, even if you have something that is worth researching. And, it might not lead, or this may not say that plants are like these conscious beings, but there's something going on. But the very thought of it, which is interesting, that scientific approach to it, and takes me back to what I was saying about remote viewing, the way that was handled. You almost need a good PR machine to make it acceptable in some ways.
Oh, you do, yeah. Which is what that book was. What was it called? Getting fruity with the lettuces, whatever. Yeah. That's the way to present it to people. But it does make me, I've got some vegetarians in my life.
Well,
what are they doing?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I was thinking that while you were talking about it. Does it help the cause of vegetarianism or not? I guess it doesn't, does it?
Well, what are you going to eat if you don't? I suppose...
Yeah, you've got to eat something.
There are some people that only eat the fruit of it, aren't there? So there'll be people who will only eat things that are sort of dead. So they'll eat a strawberry, but they won't eat cauliflower, because the cauliflower is the whole plant.
Right.
They'll eat an aubergine, because that's the fruit of the plant, you see what I mean? Which that's
certain logic to
it. There is certain logic to it. Yeah. And you can still have chips if you do that.
Yeah.
Which is obviously the most important bit.
Yeah. Would King Edward approve?
I don't know. I mean, the potato
You're eating
king,
my children.
He must know that that's why we raise. Or maybe no one's told him. Maybe he just wonders where they go. And have to say to him, they've gone to live on a farm.
God, there'd be some deep religious text, wouldn't there, amongst the potato followers that explain all that away.
The walkers.
Yeah, wow. Fascinating, though.
Yeah, so that's all I have to say on the matter at the moment. But I just thought that would be it's an interesting, like when you're out mowing the grass.
Yeah.
Listen for the pops and crackles.
Yeah.
And imagine what you could do if you could talk to your houseplant. I mean, like, some people can grow houseplants, other people can't. I can't. My partner can. No. The house is, like, almost creaking with houseplants. The reason I don't have them is, I find them a bit annoying, if I'm honest. But also, I just can't grow them. So I wonder whether the plants are like, they can see that I'm thinking, this is annoying. And it's like, well, fine, I'm going to die then.
Well, I've got a couple of fake plants in here that are not real. I'm wondering if that's kind of botanical appropriation now.
Oh, you've really done it now.
Yeah, I've really upset them.
Well, maybe...
That one's even got some fake water at the bottom.
That is taking it to another level.
Yeah.
Well... the other plants in your house must think that is that's a real odd thing. That's like having like a life-size human doll in the house.
Or are the other plants going, oh, they're a bit snooty, those two, aren't they? I've been trying to communicate with them for months. Not a peep out of them.
On that note, I think we'll call it for this week.
Going to say you've turned my brain to mulch.
That was one of the most sophisticated scripts I put together, because it's quite difficult to get that whole timeline story in there. But I felt it was important that we understood where it all came from. Well,
I found it very interesting, and it was delivered very well.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind. And my little Venus flytrap plant, I do love Venus flytraps. He says thank you. And as we said at the top of the show, if you wouldn't mind awfully going to patreon.com/TQM pod, signing up there, get extra, what do we call it? So the extra scoop. I nearly forgot what we do then. The extra scoop, any other bits and pieces that we put up there, which do tend to be fun and amusing, and join in with the rest of the people that are interacting there, and you will get episodes earlier than everybody else and without advertising.
Lovely. Well said. Well said, sir.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, we will be back next week. I think I've got something on simulated realities next week.
You're going to blow my mind. All right, that's great. I'm looking forward to that because I'm scared of living in a simulation. That said, I need to go and reboot myself. So I will talk to you all soon.
I've got lots of scientific proof that we may just live in a simulation.
Scarier than a ghost, man. Scarier than a ghost.
Anyway, we'll see you next week.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?